I'm 75 years old, and my best friend has been gone a little over 2 years now. And there are still mornings I wake up and my first thought is a sentence I never said to him. Not a grand speech, not some movie moment, just a simple thing a person says when they mean it. The kind of thing you don't say because you assume you'll say it later. Later is a dangerous word when you get to my age. Later starts to feel like a room you can't find the door to. I'm not telling this because I want anyone to feel sorry for me. At 75, you don't have much appetite for pity. It tastes strange. I'm telling it because the quiet parts of life, what we don't say, what we put off, those are the parts that end up sitting with you when the house is empty. I live alone now, not in a dramatic way, just in a practical way. My wife passed 6 years ago. We had a long marriage full of dishes and laundry and small arguments that never mattered much. The kids are grown, and they call, and they mean well, but they have their own lives. That's how it's supposed to be. So it's mostly me and the silence. And in that silence, I hear him. His name was Thomas, technically. But nobody called him that unless they were angry or official. To me, he was Tom from the time I was 25 until the time I was 73. That's almost 50 years of knowing a person's face in every season. When you're young, friendships feel endless. You don't think of them as something you can lose. You think they're just there. Like a street you've walked down so many times you don't even notice the houses anymore. Tom was the kind of friend you don't realize is rare until you look back. He wasn't flashy. He wasn't the life of the party. He didn't light up a room. I hate that phrase anyway. Tom was steady. He'd show up when he said he would. He'd help you move a couch without making you feel like you owed him a favor for the rest of your life. He could sit in a room with you and not fill it up with noise just to prove he existed. We met in 1975. I remember that year because I remember my paycheck. I was working at a small manufacturing plant then, nothing glamorous. We made parts that went into other parts that went into bigger things you never saw up close. It was hot work, loud work, and by the end of the day, your shirt would stick to your back like it was glued there. Tom started the same week I did. He was a few years older, already married. He had this way of looking at you like he was taking his time deciding what kind of person you were, but not in a judgmental way, more like patient. The first time we spoke, it was over something stupid. A machine jammed. The supervisor was in a bad mood, which was his natural state. Tom just leaned over and said, "If you hit it from the side, it'll move. Don't hit it like you're mad at it. Hit it like you're talking sense into it." I laughed, and that was it. That was the beginning. Back then, friendship formed around ordinary things. Lunch breaks, cigarette smoke, the same shift, the same complaints. We'd sit on the loading dock with our sandwiches and talk about nothing that mattered. But the nothing mattered later when it was gone. Tom and I didn't talk about our feelings. That wasn't our language. It wasn't how men like us were raised. We talked about bills, cars that wouldn't start, bosses who thought they were kings, kids getting into trouble at school, sports we barely cared about. And through all of that, there was this unspoken thing. We were in each other's lives, reliably, without question. When my first child was born, Tom showed up at the hospital with a small stuffed bear. Not fancy, no card. He just put it on the chair and said, "Figured the kid should have something that wasn't a receipt." When Tom's father died, I drove him to the funeral home because his wife was in no shape to drive, and Tom wouldn't admit he wasn't either. We sat in the parking lot afterward for a long time. He stared at the steering wheel like it had answers in the grain of it. He didn't cry. He wasn't that kind of man in public. He just said very quietly. He didn't say much at the end. And I said, "Most people don't." And that was our version of comfort. You might hear that and think it sounds cold. It wasn't cold to us. It was just how we held each other up without naming it. Years went by. The plant changed hands. New management, new policies. We both moved into different roles. Less hands-on, more paperwork, more responsibility. That's when time started doing that thing time does. It didn't disappear all at once. It thinned out. First, it was fewer lunches together, then fewer after-work beers. Then weeks where we'd just nod in the hallway and say, "How's it going?" like we were coworkers instead of friends. But even then, I didn't feel worried because Tom was still there. And that's the part I regret. Not because I did something terrible to him, not because I betrayed him, because I assumed. I assumed we had more time. In our 40 seconds, the responsibilities stacked up like boxes in a garage. You keep piling them and telling yourself you'll organize them later. My kids were teenagers then. I was busy being a father in the way I knew how, providing, fixing, driving them places, making sure the lights stayed on. Tom's kids were younger than mine, and he was busy too. He coached Little League for a while. He complained about it the whole time, but he never missed a game. We'd still talk, but it shifted. We'd say, "We should get together." And we meant it in the moment. But the moment would pass, and then there would be another moment, and then months. And nothing bad was happening, so we didn't treat it like something that needed attention. That's how relationships erode. Not with explosions, with postponements. I can point to specific times now, little forks in the road where I chose convenience or routine or pride or just plain fatigue. Tom invited me to a fishing trip once, just a weekend. He said, "It'll be good to get out of town." I said I couldn't. Work was busy. The kids had things going on. I had a list in my head of reasons that sounded responsible. The truth is I was tired, and the idea of making plans felt like another task. He didn't get mad. Tom didn't get mad about those things. He just said, "All right, another time." Another time, there was a birthday of his. I missed his 50th. His wife threw a small party at their house. Nothing formal. She called me personally and said, "Tom would really like you to come." I said I'd try. I didn't come. It wasn't because I didn't care. It was because my wife had been in a mood that day and I didn't want to deal with it. I told myself I'd stop by for 10 minutes. Then I didn't. The next week at work, Tom didn't mention it. I didn't mention it either. That's another thing about old friendships. They can survive a lot of neglect, and that becomes the excuse for more neglect. By our 60 seconds, the plant was winding down. Automation, outsourcing, all the usual words. We both took early retirement within a year of each other. Retirement sounds like freedom when you're young. When you're older, it can feel like being set down on the side of the road and told, "All right, walk the rest." At first, I thought Tom and I would have more time then. We did, technically. But life isn't just about time. It's about energy and about habits you've built for decades. When I retired, I didn't suddenly become a new person. I became the same person, just at home more. Tom called the first week and said, "Want to grab coffee?" I said yes. We met at a diner we used to go to sometimes. The waitress was different. The menu was bigger, and everything tasted a little blander than I remembered. Tom looked older, so did I, but I could see it more clearly on him. He was thinner. His hands had more spots on them. His hair was mostly gone, and what remained had turned that pale, surrendering color. He smiled when he saw me, and there was something in it that made my chest tighten a little, like relief, like he'd been waiting. We sat and talked for 2 hours, and it was easy at first. We made jokes about our old boss. We complained about our knees. We talked about our kids. Then there was a pause, not an awkward pause, just a quiet one. And Tom said, "You ever think about how fast it all went?" I remember the way he said it. Not dramatic, just factual. Like he was reading the weather. And I said something stupid. I said, "Yeah, well, that's life. That's life." That was my whole response to him opening a door. He nodded, but I could see something close behind his eyes, like he'd tried to hand me something and I'd left it sitting there on the table. We met a few more times after that, but not as many as we should have. I don't even like the word should, but it fits here. My wife's health started to decline. Nothing sudden. A slow narrowing, doctor appointments, medications, days where she didn't want to get dressed, nights where she woke up confused. That became my world. Tom would call, and I'd say I couldn't talk long, and he'd say, "All right." Tell her I said hello. When my wife died, Tom came to the funeral. He stood near the back, hands folded, eyes down. Afterward, he walked up to me and just hugged me. We didn't hug much, Tom and I. Not because we were against it. It just wasn't what we did. But he hugged me then, and I felt something break open in me that I didn't know was sealed. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. After the funeral crowd thinned out, he stayed. He helped stack chairs. He carried food to the car. He stood beside me outside while people left, one by one, giving that same sad face, saying, "Let me know if you need anything," as if grief comes with a shopping list. Tom didn't say that. He just stayed. That should have been the moment I understood. That should have been the moment I told him what he meant to me. But I didn't, because I was numb, because I was exhausted, because I didn't know how to speak that kind of sentence out loud. So I went back to my house, and my life became smaller. That's when Tom started changing. It was subtle at first. He'd forget small things. He'd repeat a story he'd already told me, and then catch himself and laugh it off. He stopped driving at night. He said the headlights looked like a bunch of fireworks coming at you. I thought it was just age. Everything becomes just age when you get older. It's the easiest explanation. Then one day he called me and asked if I could pick him up because he didn't feel steady. His voice sounded embarrassed. I drove over. He came out slowly, holding the door frame like it was part of his balance. In the car, he stared out the window like he was trying to recognize his own neighborhood. I asked if he'd been to the doctor. He said yes. He said they were running tests. He didn't say what he was afraid of, but I could hear it in how careful he was with every word. That day at my kitchen table, he said, "You know, I think I'm going to be leaving sooner than I thought." I looked at him and I could have said it then. I could have said, "I love you, Tom," or "You're my brother," or "You're the best friend I ever had," or even just, "I'm glad you're here." But I didn't. I said, "Don't talk like that." Like that was the problem. Tom gave me a small smile, not sarcastic, not bitter, just tired. He said, "I'm not trying to be dramatic. I'm just trying to tell you, And I let the moment pass again. A few months later, his wife called me. She said he'd been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. You hear those words and the room changes. Even over the phone, you can feel it. I drove to their house the next day. Tom was in his recliner, a blanket over his legs, a glass of water on the side table like it was something he had to negotiate with. He looked up at me and said, "Well, that's that." He said it like a man reading the end of a receipt. We talked for a while, mostly about practical things, what the doctor said, what the treatment plan was, who was taking him to appointments. That's what we knew how to talk about. But in the middle of it, he reached out and touched my forearm, light as paper, and he said, "You've been alone since she passed." I said, "Yeah." He said, "I worry about you." I laughed a little, because that's what I do when something is too close to the bone. I said, "I'm fine." He didn't argue. He just nodded, but his eyes held mine in a way that felt like a last request. And still, I didn't say what I needed to say. Not because I didn't feel it. I felt it so hard it made me dizzy. But I didn't want to make it real. If I said it out loud, then we'd both have to know what was coming. So I kept it in my mouth like a penny you don't swallow. His cancer moved fast. He did chemo for a short while, but it wore him down more than it helped. His hair didn't fall out all at once. It thinned and then disappeared like a field after winter. It lost weight. His cheekbones showed sharply. His voice got keener. I visited when I could. I brought him soup sometimes, or just sat in the room while the TV played something neither of us watched. There were days when we talked about nothing. There were days when he slept and I just sat there listening to his breathing. The night before he died, I got a call from his wife. She said, "If you want to come, you should come now." I drove over in the dark, hands tight on the steering wheel. I remember every red light, every empty street. When I arrived, the house was quiet except for the soft sounds from the bedroom. Tom was in the bed, eyes closed, mouth slightly open. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him. Not weak, just reduced. His wife stepped out and gave us the room. I sat in a chair beside him. The lamp was low. The air smelled like medication and clean sheets. I watched his chest rise and fall, slow, like it was considering whether it wanted to keep doing that. And I finally started to talk. But even then, I didn't say the words. I talked around them. I told him about the first day at the plant, about the machine that jammed and his silly advice. I told him about the time he helped me change the alternator in my old car in the rain. I told him about his laugh, how it always surprised me because it was deeper than you'd expect. I said, "You've been a good friend." I said, "I'm glad we had all those years." I said all the safe sentences, but I didn't say, "I love you." I didn't say, "You mattered more than I ever told you." I didn't say, "I'm sorry I missed so much." I don't know if he could hear me. They tell you hearing is the last thing to go. Maybe that's true. Maybe it's something people say so they can believe their words landed somewhere. I sat there until morning. At some point, his breathing changed. It got more spaced out, like a song losing its rhythm. And then it stopped. No big moment. No dramatic last look. Just stopped. His wife came in and put her hand on his chest for a long time. She didn't scream. She didn't collapse. She just looked like someone who'd been carrying something heavy and finally had to set it down. At the funeral, I sat in the second row. I watched people talk about him, good things, true things. Steady, kind, reliable, a good husband, a good father, a good man. And I sat there thinking, yes, 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 yes. But I also thought, did he know what he was to me? I don't mean in theory. I mean, in his bones. Did he know that when my wife died, he was the only reason I didn't feel like the world had completely slipped out from under me? Did he know that the sound of his voice on the phone made the day feel possible? Did he know that I loved him? And the answer is, I don't know. That's what I live with. People talk about regret like it's always loud, like it's some big dramatic thing that hits you and knocks you over. For me, it's quieter than that. It's sitting in my chair at night with the TV on low and realizing there's nobody left. I can tell certain stories too. It's reaching for my phone on a Sunday and remembering there's no point. It's driving past the diner and thinking about that moment when he said, "You ever think about how fast it all went?" And realizing he was asking me to come closer, and I gave him "That's life." I replay the last night sometimes, not because I enjoy suffering, because my mind keeps searching for the moment when I could have chosen differently. I could have said it plainly. I could have made him hear it, but I didn't. And now it's gone. That's the part people don't like to admit. Some things don't get fixed. You don't get a second chance to be braver in a moment that has already passed. You don't get to go back and put the words in your mouth where they belonged. The world keeps moving forward like it doesn't care what you left undone. And maybe it doesn't. Sometimes I talk to him anyway, not in a spooky way, just in the way old men talk to the air when there's no one else. I'll be making coffee and I'll say quietly, "Tom, you would have laughed at that." Or I'll see something on the news and think he'd have an opinion. And then I remember that my opinions don't bounce off his anymore. They just sit in the room with me. If you're listening to this and you still have somebody, some friend who has been there in the background of your life for years, then you probably know what I mean. Not the friend who's exciting, not the friend who shows up for a photo, the friend who's just present, the one you can go months without seeing and still pick up like nothing happened. Those are the ones you assume will always be there. I used to think the big mistakes in life were the obvious ones. The fights, the betrayals, the disasters. Now, I think a lot of the damage comes from what you delay, from treating people like they're permanent fixtures instead of living, breathing, aging beings who can disappear. If I could go back, I wouldn't give myself some lecture about appreciating things. I wouldn't tell myself to be present. I don't even like those words. I'd just tell myself something simple. When you feel something honest, say it while you still have a mouth to say it to the right person. Because one day you'll have the feeling and you'll still have the mouth, but the person will be gone. And then the words become yours to carry. Not as a tribute, as a weight. I'm not telling you what to do. I don't know your life. I don't know what kind of friendships you have or what kind of history sits between you and the people you care about. I only know what it's like to stand at the edge of the end and realize how many chances you wasted because you thought you'd get another one. If this meant something to you, if you've got your own version of Tom, you can share it if you want. Not for me, just because sometimes saying it out loud is the only way it stops living only in your chest. As for me, I keep going. I wake up, I make my coffee, I sweep the kitchen floor. I do the small things because small things are what life is made of, especially at this age. But every so often, usually when the light in the late afternoon hits the wall just right, I feel him close in my memory. And I say it then finally. I say, I loved you, Tom, out loud in my empty house, and it doesn't fix anything. It just makes the truth land somewhere, even if it's late. I'm 75, and I don't have the illusion anymore that time is generous. It isn't cruel, it's just not generous. So I live with what I did say and what I didn't. And I try, in the quiet that's left, to be the kind of man who doesn't keep the important words locked behind pride. Because the older you get, the more you understand this. We don't really regret the days we worked too hard. We regret the people we loved in silence. And that's what I did with Tom, more than I like to admit. I loved him in silence. And now the silence is all that answers back.